The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for our webinar exploring the mobile attack Battleground. My name is Shona Bradshaw. I'm the marketing manager for Bytes Security Partnership. I'm delighted to be joined today by Tom Davison, who's one of the senior technical engineers at Lookout, who's a subject matter expert in all things mobile threats. Just to give you a very quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. So we'll cover just the agenda for today. We'll cover who we are very briefly, and a few of you will be familiar with it, so I will keep it brief on the Bytes introduction. I'll introduce Lookout and why we are proposing this webinar is something that we believe our customers should be thinking about right now, and then hand over to Tom Davison. Tom will be covering why mobile is one of the new attack vectors and our primary attack vector for compromising businesses at the moment. He'll review the current mobile threat landscape, have a look at some of the top mobile threats such as Pegasus, which has hit headlines relatively recently, and then also be discussing how Lookout can help with some of the practical solutions that Lookout have developed in order to secure mobiles. I would say just a bit of housekeeping. I've got attendee lines on mute throughout the webinar. However, we do encourage questions for the question and answer session. As those occur to yourself throughout the webinar, please do pop them across to us via the questions box or the chat function. Also, if you have any problems on audio or anything that you want to raise during the webinar, please use the same function to make those clear to us, and we'll make sure that gets everything smoothly throughout the webinar. We also have, throughout the webinar, we are focusing on the solutions and strategies. We won't be talking any commercial terms or anything like that during this session. It's intended to be a strategic update for customers. Obviously, we do welcome those conversations after the webinar, and your Bytes account manager is at hand to take those conversations further. So without further ado, a little bit about Bytes. Who are we? We are a network specialist security company, and we like to think that we offer a good mix of agility, insight, and a personal approach. So we've been focusing on security for 16 years, and we very much started off in the network security space and have continued to operate in that space and chosen not to branch out into the wider IT space for the reason that we want to make sure that our customers are getting a specialist service from us. We are part of the multi-billion Bytes and technology and Altron group, the Allied Electronics group. That obviously means that we can offer customers stability from knowing that alongside the personal approach, it's backed by the resources you'd expect from a multinational company. We offer security expertise, and we have an in-house team of fully accredited engineers and account managers who hold all the necessary relevant qualifications in terms of the technical consultancy side of the business, which allows us to support our customers from a technical perspective, not just from a sort of licensing and hardware perspective. We're very fortunate that we have some absolutely fantastic technical and vendor relationships, and we hold top-tier vendor status with the likes of Checkpoint, the likes of ForcePoint, F5. So we do work and have quality relationships and access to technical resource from those partners, which enable us to give customers a good service. So where do we work? We work across network security, content security, data security, and we specialise in access authentication, working with partners such as RSA and Gemalto. And what we're here to talk to you about today is the bottom right-hand side of the screen, the emerging area of mobility and mobility security. So we're wanting to enable businesses to grow and enable productivity in their organisations in a secure fashion. That's the reason we're talking to you today. As part of that, we offer in-house direct engineer support, we offer scoping, planning, project delivery, a whole suite of training and knowledge transfer solutions, and we're also highly involved with our customers in terms of their security strategy development. Sessions like today, roadmap reviews and technical reviews form part of that, making sure that we are actively trying to educate customers on the latest threats. So as part of that, so why is mobile security a priority? mobile device management manages devices, but essentially it doesn't do enough to secure data. It doesn't secure the data on those devices and provide security solutions that are appropriate and that are sufficient to combat targeted attacks. At the same time, there's such a rising adoption of mobile endpoints, whether that's pro tablets, whether it's people working from their iPad, iPhones, using roaming users, whether it's actually end users within the organisations, it's staff, or whether it's stakeholders and third parties. Companies are increasingly needing to get access to their applications and their infrastructure to people using non-traditional endpoints. When that's coupled with the fact that there are lowering barriers to attack on the mobile endpoint, the mobile solutions, with it being such a new space, exploit kits and exploits can be purchased from the internet at an extremely low cost, and it's not difficult for the bad guys, the adversaries out there, to get hold of and to have the ability to deliver mobile-specific threats. And that's one of the things that Tom's going to be talking about, is that not only are threats on a mobile to data rising, but actually there's a development of using things like the camera on phones, some of the functionalities that modern smartphones present, to attack companies in different ways. And lastly as well, ease of management matters. So companies need to find mobile security solutions that are integrated with their existing mobile device management suites, with their existing Microsoft estate and their existing in-house infrastructure. So that's really why we've asked Lookout to come and talk to you about some of the plays and some of the strategies that your adversaries are taking today. Why are we working with Lookout? They are a mobile security specialist, so they are integrated with mobile device management players, but they are not just pure MDM. They have seen some great rapid growth in customer adoptions, and as they have focused in this area for so long, they really are subject matter experts in threats that are evolving to specifically attack mobile endpoints. So with that in mind, I'll stop talking and hand over to Tom Davison, who is a senior security engineer for Lookout, who will be spending the next half an hour sharing the latest on mobile attacks and what you can do to prevent and protect your businesses from them. I'm just going to hand over to Tom. I'm just going to change presenter, and the screen will go back to the holding screen just for a second while Tom brings up his presentation deck for today. Thank you very much for listening, and over to Tom.
Thanks, Shona. Can you just confirm if you can hear me okay and see the presentation?
I can hear you loud and clear, and I can see your presentation. I'm going to mute myself now to avoid any feedback or background noise.
Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. I'm going to talk about a few different things in this next half hour or so. I want to give you a bit of an idea about the background, what's happening in mobility and why this is becoming an area of interest for cyber criminals and attackers. I want to talk about some of the threats that Lookout is seeing, and then finally really talk about how we suggest you start to deal with this and what are the steps you can think about taking. So kind of an obvious one really, but there's this trajectory towards mobile. Maybe you haven't considered quite how quickly this trajectory is happening, in that you perhaps have a view on how mobile is being used in your enterprise, but perhaps the view you have in the reality may differ somewhat. And if you look at what's going on out there, there's certainly trends where we're all driving to be more mobile in our businesses, but there's a parallel trend, which is people are empowering themselves. So even if you're not giving your users the mobile experience they want, they're pretty much finding ways to create that themselves, either through bringing devices, downloading apps, in some cases even going as far as creating apps. I've seen people doing that. So there's a steady journey towards mobile being the preferred interface for a lot of the things that we're doing day to day. It's obviously being accelerated by convergence of devices and operating systems. And we're getting to a stage where the choice of whether you work on a mobile or desktop is often down to where you are and convenience rather than the capability. The power of the device and the achievement that you can get, or I suppose the tasks you can accomplish, are very, very similar now. And so this idea of mobile as another thing, as a sideline item, is rapidly disappearing. That comes with a couple of other consequences, though. This is perhaps a really obvious one, but one that is worth reiterating. That if you think about how we've typically allowed employees to work and secured assets, we've either been within the perimeter or we've allowed people to connect in from very controlled desktops over controlled access points, VPNs and things like that. With mobile, as it's accompanied to this movement of data into cloud, we're finding ourselves in a position where often there's a direct link from a mobile device to a cloud storage or a cloud app interface that's completely outside of the tools that IT have used for a number of years. So that's firstly a problem because there's a change in how you need to go about controlling and securing this, but also I suppose the handle you had on things is rapidly eroding, and the visibility that people have into what's going on out there is changing fast. And then the third aspect, which Shona alluded to, is the fact that mobile presents a new opportunity for hackers. So we're not just talking about some of the things they might be interested in on a desktop. We're talking about some of the other capabilities that a mobile device brings along, such as location data, camera access, microphone access, plus the fact you've got a number of interesting bits of data about an individual in one place. So you've probably got calendar and contacts, you've got social media. So there's a number of things you could piece together about a user's day-to-day goings-on in order to make some kind of targeted user focused attack potentially much more successful. Then there's other things that we've almost stumbled into. So if you think going back 10 years, the way you would access your corporate VPN was often using a two-factor authentication token, which probably was a hardware token hanging around your neck. On your keyring was maybe a smart card. Where are your tokens now? In most instances, they sit on the mobile device. And so it's not just corporate credentials, it's also two-factor authentication that the mobile device is involved in. And so, not surprisingly, mobile devices are becoming interesting to attackers, not just for the traditional means, for the reason someone would go after a desktop endpoint, but because they bring with them a wealth of new opportunities. And then I suppose the fourth one that's not even on the slide here is that if you just look at the marketplace out there, if I'm a cyber criminal that's maybe not even targeting a business but just looking to monetize, the volume of people that use devices is absolutely huge. Most young people today, most children don't use a PC or a laptop. They solely interact with the internet through a mobile device. So if you're looking to do a very sort of high volume attack to monetize, mobile is the start point. It makes absolute sense to go after a mobile device as your primary entry point. So that's kind of the background that's going on generally. And broadly speaking, this is relevant for consumer environments just as much as it is for enterprise. I think the challenge with enterprise is it's very difficult to draw a line. So if the device is entirely used as a consumer device, that's one thing. But as soon as you have a device that's personally enabled, which seems to be the majority of cases these days, you have this challenge where it's very difficult to draw a line between an enterprise usage of a device and enterprise data and consumer usage and so on. And if you think about how you operate your network environments at the moment, you probably have views like this. So while we're looking at mobile related data here, you're probably used to these sort of dashboards that will very quickly give you a heads up on the status of your environment. They'll allow you to focus in on hotspots that are perhaps vulnerable or even under attack, and they'll allow you to prioritize what you do and where you put your attention. When you talk to customers at the moment, when I go into enterprises and ask them about their capability within mobile, this is what people have. As soon as you look at the mobile environment, it's like someone switched off the lights, and people don't yet have the tools or capabilities to get visibility, let alone some kind of defense in place for the attacks that are occurring in the mobile environment. And what are those attacks? What is it you should be concerned about? Well, a mobile device is a computer at the end of the day. Let's be honest, there's differences in the operating system, but what's happening is we're now walking around with sophisticated hardware in our pockets, capable of a number of things, and running in a very similar way to desktops. And so it stands to reason that the risk vectors and the entry points for attacks are very, very similar. One of the main differences, I suppose, is the fact that we have apps coming from generally from curated app stores. So there's an app ecosystem which changes the nature of how software gets installed on the device, but it comes with its own complexity and its own vulnerabilities. But beyond that, you have operating systems that have vulnerabilities, just like you do on desktops, and you have networks that we connect to, and this is exacerbated with the fact that mobile devices connect to many, many networks all the time, and people are typically going for the most open, most free, most convenient network at any one point. And the trouble with all these things is the user has a very unprivileged viewpoint. So as a user of a mobile device, as long as I stay within the parameters of how I operate that device, I tend to feel a sense of security. Yet I have no real way of validating whether that security is well-founded or not. I have no real way of validating whether my operating system is vulnerable, whether the network I've just connected to is safe, and whether the app I've downloaded is either malicious or maybe, if not malicious, presents some kind of risk I'm not aware of, either to the organization or perhaps to myself. So these are the areas that we need to be concerned about. And before I talk, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the threats that you could expect to see in your environments. I'm also going to talk about some of the more extreme threats that we're seeing right now, which are starting to change the conversation in customers, in organizations, and they're also getting lots of headlines around the world, because I think what we're seeing now is some of the really serious threats are changing from being something that a user would perhaps need to consciously introduce by manually jailbreaking their device or rooting their device, something that is much more automated and invisible to the user. So what I want to talk about for the next 5 minutes or so is an outline of a very sophisticated piece of surveillanceware that Lookout was involved in discovering and unpicking effectively and disclosing to the world a couple of months ago. So the story of this particular episode starts here. So we have somebody called Ahmed Mansour, he's a citizen of United Arab Emirates, lives in the UAE. And Ahmed was somebody that came to prominence back in 2011. So as part of a lot of the pro-democracy uprisings that we saw in certain regions at that time, he was involved in that and put forward his voice for democracy. And this led him to being a target of interest, should we say, and led him to be imprisoned and unable to leave the country. And since then, he's found himself targeted by a number of campaigns, both desktop and mobile, and is very used to, I suppose, being suspicious about things that may come his way. So the story starts with Mr. Mansour. What happened is that one day, this was towards the end of August this year, 2016, he received a message that looked like this, received an SMS message to his phone asking him to click on a link. Now, and this was an iPhone 6 running iOS 9.3.3, which you can see there. Now, most people don't think twice about clicking links on our devices because they're very used to the idea or the perception that these are secure and these are not desktops and are not vulnerable in the same way. However, our protagonist here was used to being targeted, so rather than click the link, he shared the information with a group called Citizen Lab, who he had an affiliation with or had a relationship with, should we say. So Citizen Lab are a group based out of the University of Toronto, and they really sit at the crossover point between human rights and cybersecurity. And what Citizen Lab do is they provide the services to try and keep people safe online who may be targeted for their beliefs or for whatever they're discussing out on the internet. And Ahmed Mansour contacted Citizen Lab when he received this text message and asked them to investigate further. Now it so happened that Lookout had relationships with Citizen Lab as well, and being recognized as people that have mobile expertise and have been involved in a number of disclosures in the past, we started a joint investigation into this particular event. Now what happened when that link was clicked on a controlled device was a chain of events that was like nothing we'd ever really seen before. So what happened when you clicked the link was a piece of spyware, surveillanceware, was silently dropped onto the device, and all sorts of information was very quickly being broadcast from that device. And over the course of the next 10 days, our team started unpicking this particular piece of surveillanceware and found some really, really interesting insights. So what turned out to be going on was that the link he'd been sent was a one-time link to download a piece of software called Pegasus. Now Pegasus is probably best described as a legal intercept. It's a tool that a group called NSO Group sell in a closed market to a specific set of customers for a reasonable amount of money, which will allow people to lawfully intercept. So it's going to depend on the jurisdiction that this is used in, but effectively to survey individuals without their acknowledgement or awareness. So we know that NSO Group are a successful organization. They're based out of Israel, mostly a number of members from the ex-military services. We know from leaked data that they made over 100 million and 150 million revenue in 2015. So there's clearly a market here, and there's clearly business being done. We also know that this particular tool had been sold at one point for over $8 million for 300 device licenses. So this is an operation, and there's a market for this. Now NSO Group, not much has been previously known about NSO or their tools, but what we found when we were analysing Pegasus was an awful lot of interesting detail about how they were operating. In this case, what was really unusual and really sophisticated was the fact that there were 3 zero-day vulnerabilities for iOS involved. So very quickly in the investigation, it was understood that there was a 0-day vulnerability in Safari that was being used, and what happened here was effectively it was allowing unsigned code to run on the device. That allowed the attacker to then run code of their choice to exploit 2 other vulnerabilities that existed in the iOS kernel, which effectively allowed a jailbreak for the software concerned. And this was really compelling because it was the first time, firstly, that we'd seen this many 0 days for iOS chained together, but secondly, the first time that we'd seen a remote jailbreak where the user hadn't had to tether the device or consciously run some kind of software on the device to jailbreak the device first of all. What those vulnerabilities were allowing were the exploits against those vulnerabilities were allowing this piece of software to then download, embed itself on the device, and establish communication back to a controlling infrastructure. So very early on in the process, Lookout identified these, and we started working with Apple, who were extremely responsive, and within 10 days had issued patches for these vulnerabilities, which came out in iOS 9.3.5, also included in iOS 10. So it was a great piece of collaboration, and once those patches were out, anyone that had patched the device would have been immune from anyone trying to use these to install the spyware on the device. But what was interesting was looking at the behavior of the surveillanceware once it was installed on a compromised device. So because of the level of privileges accorded to the software, it was able to hook in at the kernel layer. So it was a kernel level module that was effectively looking for a number of interesting applications on the device. There's a few examples here, but there were a number of different capabilities for the majority of the popular communication apps that you'd see and use today. And the way this thing behaved was it was hooking in at an app level, so that any end-to-end encryption that was taking place within the app was still behaving exactly as you'd expect. And if you'd intercepted that traffic on the wire, it would have been encrypted. If you'd used the app, if you'd been on the other end of the conversation, everything would have looked completely normal. But by hooking in at the level it was integrated at, it was able to take copies of all data before it was encrypted and send it to a destination from the device. And it was extremely stealthy in how it did this. It made sure it didn't overuse battery, it didn't overuse network bandwidth. And it also looked for a number of different things on the device and would uninstall itself if it saw those. So an extremely sophisticated and well-written piece of software. In addition to intercepting communications, it could also still a number of other things of value from the device. So pretty much any credential that you'd ever had stored for any Wi-Fi network, it could access the keychain, location, could access calendar data, turn on the microphone, exfiltrate contacts and more. So it pretty much gave the attackers everything they would need to track the whereabouts of a user, track what they were doing via calendar and contacts, enable the mic at will, and steal a number of credentials. So a very, very extreme example of what's possible on a mobile device. Now Apple released some patches which closed the door on this particular piece of software, but this is a business. The people that made this are in business, and it's only a viable business if you can continue to have your software capable of being installed on phones. So there is a thriving market for 0 days. And what you can see here on the screen is a price list from a company called Zerodium, who will buy and acquire 0-day vulnerabilities. And you can see there that the price for a remote jailbreak for iOS 10 is considerable. It's high enough to attract plenty of interest from people that want to find and disclose these kind of vulnerabilities. So it's only a matter of time, we believe, before things evolve and new 0 days start being used in this chain. The other thing, of course, is once existing vulnerabilities are disclosed, they're out there in the wild for anyone to take advantage of against devices that are perhaps unpatched. So this idea of vulnerabilities existing in mobile devices is very similar to the idea that we have with desktops, and if you don't keep up with patching and if you don't stay up to date, then you're just as vulnerable on a mobile device as you would be on a desktop computer. So Pegasus and Trident, that's a fairly extreme example of one of the most targeted attacks that we've seen to date, one of the most sophisticated attacks. But it was something that we were able to cover from the way we deal with this problem. And how do we do that? Well, I suppose the first thing is even before I talk about Lookout, you need to think about your approach to mobile security generally. There seems to be a perception out there that because mobile devices have a number of native security features and generally take things to a level far above desktops and have learned from the lessons of older versions of desktop operating systems, there's a perception that nothing else is needed. So we have this idea of sandboxing of apps, a permissions model that's a lot more restrictive. We have app stores that scan apps before they're released to the market, and developer programs that vet people developing apps. So a number of security mechanisms are in place, but of course all that means is people have to try a bit harder and think a bit wider in terms of how they look to attack a mobile device. So we see a very common method is stealing certificates, so you can sign code that you can then distribute and install on someone's device. We've seen things like Xcode Ghost, which introduce methods to insert code into apps that can bypass App Store review. And we see increasingly very sophisticated ways of jailbreaking or routing devices to allow administrative level privileges to an app or to an attacker on the device. And quite often these will bypass some of the MDM jailbreak and root detection that's taking place on the device because of how those mechanisms are actually working. So just because things are more complex doesn't mean that these devices are immune. Reality is there's an asset value, and if there's a value to the data that someone's trying to get, then the effort will increase. As the value increases, so the effort will increase. And if the protection you've got in place is minimal or non-existent, that just makes the job even easier and the cost to attack lower. So it makes the equation balance back in the favor of the attacker. So what to do about it? Well, firstly, don't assume that out of the box you're secure. And most customers I talk to don't, and they've deployed technologies such as these. They've looked at MDM, they've looked at containers, and taken some good first steps towards putting control and security into their mobile environments. However, what you need to be aware of is that these only really cover part of the equation. So an MDM will allow you to have some management of the device. That's what we're talking about here, mobile device management or enterprise mobility management. But when it comes to context of app threats, when it comes to sophisticated exploits against OSs, and when it comes to networks that these devices are connecting to, that's not typically where the focus is. Containers are a very good way of segregating data, but they rely on the fact that the device itself is not compromised. And if you can have someone take advantage of a vulnerability in the OS and can get root level access to your device, then you can no longer trust the integrity of your container, and you can no longer trust the integrity of a VPN that you might have running on that device. Just as I showed you in the previous example with Pegasus, if someone has that level of access to the operating system of the device, effectively anything is possible. And yet it's a more expensive way of attacking someone, but it opens the door to a number of opportunities. So it's this remaining area that you need to be concerned about. So the first step is absolutely deploy an MDM, but then think about layering an additional security layer on top of that. And this is how the market is evolving, and this is how we see Gartner now talking about mobile threat defense as a recommended layer on top of or alongside an EMM. The other thing to consider as well is you might have situations where EMM is not appropriate. Maybe you've got users who won't allow you to have management of their device in a BYO scenario, but you still need to provide some baseline security. So something like Lookout is a very good option there, where we are not going to invade the privacy of the user, but we're going to give a level of assurance around baseline security, and also the more sophisticated threats that might turn up on that device. So how do we do it? Well, we treat a lot of the way we defend on a mobile device is we treat it as a mobile data problem, a big data problem, and we try and offload a lot of the effort away from the device itself and take advantage of the ability to really scale dramatically in a cloud infrastructure and pull in data and be able to execute machine learning and other queries across that data to come up with intelligent solutions. So we've spent the last 7-8 years building out a network of sensors, which is effectively devices registered to our service. So we're over 100 million devices registered on the Lookout service today. And that's very important to us for a number of reasons. It gives us a very broad coverage geographically, so we don't just see in certain pockets around the world where people might be running our product what's going on. We see very broad coverage. Over 100 countries have at least 10,000 sensors. And that's important because of the way mobile threats can evolve and traverse the globe. But we also have a very rich source of telemetry, which can be used to power our solution. So we can see what we see on mobile devices, and we can ingest that along with all the other data that we ingest from all the other sources that we acquire from, and we can do analysis across that and come up with conclusions. So particularly with app threats, we have an ingestion pipeline where you can see we're taking in over 90,000 apps per day on a busy day, and that's because you have lots of new apps, but you also have lots of new versions of popular apps. We'll ingest those and we'll do an analysis of those in the cloud away from the device, so that when a device encounters an app, we will have already seen it and we'll already be able to give that device an instant decision on whether there's any risk associated with that device. We're currently up to 35 million apps, so this slide needs to evolve. And that number, you can imagine with the rate we're taking in apps and analyze those apps, grows extremely quickly. And it also fuels a number of convictions. So when I say apps convicted per day over on the right-hand side, what I'm saying is over 5,000 apps per day have something in them that you should be concerned about. So they could be overtly malicious, they could be risky, or somewhere in between. So we'll give you an assessment on how that app is behaving, and we'll allow a device to react if that app turns up on the device. Now this is talking about apps, but obviously there's network threats, there's OS level threats as well. So we do a number of things to fingerprint devices and analyze those fingerprints in our cloud, so we get correlations. So even if there's attacks against the device that maybe no one has ever seen before, we're not looking with a specific signature on the device for a specific thing. We're looking at anomalies, we're looking at changes in behavior to what we've seen before, which could indicate a new threat. Network attacks will also involve us dynamically looking at networks, probing networks, and looking for anyone that could be trying to intercept and analyze traffic from a mobile device. So what does that allow us to see? Well, 35 million apps is a lot of apps. Why is that important? Well, it's important because apps can very easily evade detection if you're only looking at it from a user point of view or even an MDM point of view. So when you download an app, you're probably going to see an app name and a package name and not much more, perhaps a version. This is just an example of the Candy Crush app, which is a very popular app. Querying our data set, you'll see that there's over 80 different versions of that app that we have knowledge of. This is as of a few months ago, back in September. 20 of those we've categorized as some kind of threat. To the user, it would be almost impossible to differentiate between one or the other. The way we can differentiate from our perspective is by having our agent on the device, which captures a signature, captures a hash of that app and can differentiate one from the other and give users an extremely granular view. So we see this is a very common way for threats to get onto devices via apps, quite often through apps that are outside of app stores. So people load apps directly onto devices for Android or iOS outside of the app stores. But also we see apps that do get into the public app stores as well, that bypass some of the security checking and come to light later on. You can see there are a couple of different types of threats: the Trojan, adware, chargeware. Some of the things that users would be worried about from a consumer perspective would be things like this. So Banker Mastino is one we've been tracking for a while. It's known also as Marcher, a couple of different names for this thing. Banker Mastino is a mobile banking Trojan, and it will intelligently look at a user's device, look for financial apps that might be installed, and when those are activated, it will have downloaded the relevant overlay screen, and it will pop that up and try and capture user credentials. And these apps started we saw this begin in certain geographical areas and then grow in sophistication and grow in prevalence. So you can see the countries where we've been tracking this particular app, and you tend to find that it will start in one area and move to another, and they'll add new institutions, new capabilities into the app. Now more recently that will include things like the ability to remotely update the app via SMS, flip command and control servers and things like that. So if your only way to track an app is by looking at the network connections that app makes, you can become blind very quickly when those malware authors update their software. So it's vitally important from our perspective not just to have that visibility of connections and reputation and things like that, but also to have copies of the app themselves and be able to track evolutions of the families via the binary code of that app. I talked about apps making it into the app stores. This is just an example from Q3 of this year of some of the apps that we've been involved in helping Google take it down from the Play Store. So each of the red spiders there is representing a different app. And you'll see this is very common that when someone develops a variant of an app, a variant of a family, they'll go off and create tens, maybe hundreds or even thousands of different apps that all embed the same malicious code. The way our technology works is we don't need to look at the unique attributes of an app. We look at the commonality of the code, so we can take 1,000 apps we've never seen before, and we can very quickly identify if there's shared attributes of code, shared code segments in there, which makes it very expensive for attackers, because effectively if there's any code reuse, that it's very, very easy for us to detect and alert on that. Similarly for iOS, the App Store has generally been a safer place, but vulnerabilities exist, as we talked about earlier, and these are leading to some of the more sophisticated attacks against iPhone and iPad. So I've talked quite a lot about intelligence, but how does the solution actually work to protect you? Well, obviously we're about gaining intelligence, analyzing that data and coming up with conclusions, but then we need to be able to action that. So what we do is we have an app for end users that sits on the device, but we go to great lengths not to invade user privacy or be overzealous with battery usage or network usage. So the idea is it's a very low impact app that will generally sit in the background and just keep an eye on the device for the user. That will talk to our cloud backend, and you'll have the ability to manage and administer that and get a view on what's happening. If a threat's detected, users will be notified, the admin will be notified, and you can take appropriate steps. most of the time people will deploy this in conjunction with some kind of MDM. So this is an example of how we integrate with Microsoft's EMS stack. So we have a connection into AAD, we have a connection into Intune. And what that means is that if a threat turns up on a device that's under management via Intune, Lookout will detect that threat and we'll report that to you as a Lookout administrator, but we'll also push that threat notification immediately into Intune console, and an Intune administrator would see the device is no longer compliant, and an Intune conditional access policy would then kick in and restrict access to resources for the duration of that threat being present. So the user can remediate the threat, they can remove whatever it was they downloaded or disconnect from that malicious network they may have connected to. And at that point they'll be granted back access as their device falls back into a compliant state again. Excuse me. So what you have is a very efficient automated workflow that really means if someone's already got MDM or an EMM out there managing their devices, this is just an extra layer of intelligence that fuels the decisions the EMM can make and doesn't really add extra overhead from a management capability. That whole workflow is very much an automated occurrence. So just to end, if you subscribe to any of Gartner's publications or you follow what they talk about, they recently, about a week ago, came out with their predictions for 2017, and it's been very interesting to see how the position has evolved during the last 12 months or so, to the point where Gartner are now talking about the need to start evaluating mobile threat defense tools. They're talking about the fact that EMM is no longer enough. We're seeing more advanced attacks, as well as a big uplift actually in the what I call more commoditized everyday attacks that are targeting devices, things like ransomware that are less very indiscriminate and just attack a number of devices but can be devastating in the consequences they'd have for a business. So the recommendation is very much to start looking at these solutions and how they can enhance what you're doing, even if you've got a mature EMM environment. So that really brings me to the end of the session. We've got some time for Q&A, and as Shona says, if anybody is interested in follow-up in more detail, we'll certainly have the ability to do that at a later date. So Shona, that's the end of my presentation. I don't know if we've had any questions come in.
So I haven't had anything through as we've gone through, but we do have 5-10 minutes for questions. So please just take a couple of minutes to review what you've seen today. Type any questions into the sort of question and answer, the chat box. I'll pose them to Tom, and we can have a chat about anything you've seen. I'll give sort of a couple of minutes for questions for everyone to have time to fire a couple across, hopefully.
What I can also talk about, if people want to have a couple of minutes to think, is just a couple of the questions I would get quite routinely when I talk to customers. So I think one of the ones we'll hear quite often is, what's the risk to my organization? Do I need to worry about this now? There's lots of things you can read out there. We publish a lot on our blog, so blog.lookout.com is a great source of information for the threats that we're uncovering and disclosing. So that's a good start point. I think that the message is fairly clear that it doesn't really matter whether you're on Android or iOS. There's threats that can affect both platforms. They might be very targeted. They might be maybe network attacks, maybe app-based threats, but the capabilities exist on both platforms. And the first thing to really be concerned about is whether you have basic visibility, at least of the apps in use and the level of operating systems that people have got, making sure people have patched. I haven't really talked today about at-risk. I've talked about threats, but the other thing we commonly discuss with customers is what kind of risk is being introduced by apps that they do want to use. So apps that come straight from app stores that are not malicious, but perhaps are sharing data. And with the the upcoming data protection regulation that's coming into force, people are very concerned about where apps might be sharing information and what type of capability they have to take information and share from the device. So we provide a lot of analysis about that in our toolset as well. The second question I'll often get asked as well is, if I want to start looking at this type of technology, how do I do that? What's the easiest way to get a sense of that? And the nice thing is, being a cloud-based technology, being a SaaS solution, it's very easy for us to provision someone access to a tenant where they can get management of devices, and then because it's a an App Store driven solution, you can download apps to devices and start managing those and having a play. You can optionally evaluate just on a BYO, an unmanaged device, or you can time with an MDM to do that. And today we support Mobile Iron, we support AirWatch, we support Microsoft EMS or Microsoft Intune. So the three we have, that list grows. So if you don't hear what you're using on that list, by all means talk to us, and there's a good chance we'll be doing that soon anyway. But if you do integrate with the EMM, you have that ability to implement some kind of remediation policy, and you have the ability to take the information that Lookout provides straight into the EMM, which can perhaps give you that single view on the world of your mobile estate that you probably don't have right now.
Okay, I do have one question. Tom's just come up here. Are there any non-enterprise, non-managed apps that a consumer can download, for example, in iOS, to protect themselves? He does say that he realises the discussion centres around enterprise, but is there a consumer, non-enterprise ones?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We have one ourselves. So I talked earlier on about the sensors that we have. What I'm often referring to there are devices on our service, and a lot of those will be consumer devices for Android or iOS. So if you go on the Play Store or go on the Apple App Store and search for Lookout, you'll see that we've got agents there with free-to-use variants, with premium variants. There's a Lookout for Work variant as well, which is the enterprise version, and then there's a plain Lookout variant, which is our personal edition, as we call it. There are differences between the two. One of the main differences is the ability to centrally manage and integrate with MDM. But the other thing is there are some differences about how some of the security works. There are also some differences on features. So for example, the personal edition will allow you to back up photos, contacts. It will allow you to track the location of your phone in case it gets stolen. It will do theft alerts and take a selfie of someone if they're trying to hack into your phone. There's a number of features that are great for personal users, but not necessarily so appropriate for an enterprise where you may have other solutions for those things, or maybe tracking location of a device is not something you want to do in a corporate environment. So yeah, absolutely, we have different flavors and different situations where one is more relevant than the other, but all out there.
Okay, Cheers, thank you. That's answered his question. Brilliant. And one more question that you have, so you've mentioned iOS and Android. Are there any plans for Windows?
Yeah, so Windows 10 is a conversation point at the moment. We have a relationship with Microsoft as part of the integration we've done into Intune. As part of that, we're absolutely exploring support for Windows 10. I think it's definitely something we want to follow up. If someone's got interest, we'd love to follow up on a one-to-one conversation, and we can share more detail about what we're doing there, and also hear requirements. But yeah, we're very much looking at securing mobility, whatever platform that might be on. That's our aim.
Okay. So I don't have any more questions at present. I'll just give it 30 seconds or so more for you guys. If there's anyone who wants to type in any other questions, that would be great. What I'll do during that time is just thank you all for taking the time out of your very busy schedule this afternoon to attend, and also thank Tom for his detailed and insightful presentation. The session today was recorded, so I will send you a recording of the session so you can share that internally with your mobility teams, with your security teams, so you can take advantage of the insights today as well. Haven't got any further questions, so I'm just going to wrap up and thank everyone for their time and wish everyone a nice weekend when it comes. Thank you.
Thank you.